Welcome everybody to the first in a series of webinars around gender diversity and inclusion, organized by the Council for Business with Britain. My name is Linda and I'm Vice President of the Council for Business with Britain. First of all, may I introduce Roshani, President of the Council for Business with Britain, to explain why we embark on this journey.
Thank you, Linda. Welcome, everybody. It is indeed a privilege to host this, and my thanks to Lord Davies. He always insists on being called Mervyn. So Mervyn it is. Thank you very much once again for engaging with us and for helping us kick off this first of the 5 series webinar. Linda will talk more about the series that we are planning. Why are we doing that? As you know, CBB is the go-to organization for trade and investment between the two countries. We've been in existence for about 20 years, a little over 20 years, and happy to say that we've contributed to the country's economy and the English education in many ways. We did have a gender diversity, or what can I say, for Women's Day, we did have a webinar involving some of the committee members, which was quite revealing, and it was more or less of a personal experience sharing session. Based on that, Linda has been working in the last year in making some contributions in this area towards the business community, because we felt it's our responsibility to work towards diversity and inclusion in the member companies. So I'll let Linda talk more of her work and the planning that she has, but we are indeed very, very happy to kick this series off. And my thanks to Mervyn once again, and thank you also to Bani for agreeing to moderate this. She's one of the best we could have as a moderator in the country, I know. So indeed, privileged to have the session moderated by her. Thank you, Linda, and over to you.
Thank you, Roshani. We will kick off today with an esteemed guest joining us from the UK. Prime Minister Boris Johnson appointed Lord Davies of Abersoch as the Prime Minister's trade envoy for Sri Lanka on October 5th, 2020. Now, Lord Davies would like to be addressed as Mervyn, so I will do that moving forward. Mervyn is chairman of Corsair, where he serves as a member of the Investment Committee. He's also chairman of Letter One and Intermediate Capital Group. He was UK Minister for Trade, Investment and Small Business from January 2009 until May 2010. Prior to his appointment, he was chairman of Standard Chartered and served as group executive from 2001 to 2006. Mervyn led the 5-year review on women on boards in the UK, which was published in 2015. This report is also known as the Davies Review. He is and has been a great advocate of the cause. Our discussion today with Mervyn will be moderated by an esteemed professional in the field of gender diversity and inclusion in Sri Lanka. Bani Chandrasena's present role at the London Stock Exchange Group focuses on one of the primary strategic initiatives for the company, future-proofing their talent as well as pipeline through ensuring that they create and sustain an inclusive and holistic culture. With the pandemic that has engulfed the world at this time, her role in introducing well-being as part of the culture, leading the way with leadership taking an intentional role, is pivotal to the sustainability of future corporates. Bani is also Vice President for Diversity Collective Lanka, an association that drives diversity in Sri Lanka, working with education, corporates, and entrepreneurs. She also leads the Capacity Forum at SLASCOM, which is about widening the pipeline of talent, initiating a holistic education for youth to be better prepared for success in the industry. Now, before we really get started, if during the discussion you have any questions, please type them in the chat box, addressing the host and the co-host. There will be some time at the end of the discussion to address some of the questions. I will now hand over to Bani and hope you will enjoy an insightful conversation on this important topic. Bani.
Thank you, Linda. I hope you can hear me. Thank you, CBB, for the invitation. Mervyn, I'm so excited to be here. It's not that often that I get a chance to talk about my day job, connecting my day job with my passion, and also to be able to explore all of this based on a report that has actually transformed this very topic in the UK. So I'm really, really excited to be here, Mervyn. And as you can tell, I'm very excited, and we'll be diving into a lot of the information that I have read up on this. But before we jump into that, would you like to share your story, Mervyn, in terms of why this topic has been of interest to you and all the work you're doing around it?
Well, thank you, Bani, and thank you for the invitation. Look, I came into this issue by accident, really. I thought I was a good manager. My career was going well. I had just moved from being a managing director of Citibank in the UK to Standard Chartered, and I got moved very quickly to Asia. And by the way, I'm admitting people, so I don't like to see people in the waiting room, so I'm just clicking, and if you see me moving my hands. So I moved to Asia, and it's a great story about management, really. If you're going to be a good manager, a good leader, you start by knowing yourself. You understand your strengths, your weaknesses, and then you can complement for your own positioning in building team with different skills. So I arrived in Hong Kong. I thought I was a great manager. I went to my first meeting in Hong Kong, and it's legendary, you know, and I walked into the room and I thought, whoa, there were roughly 13 people in the conference room, 12 were women. I thought, never seen that before. And I'd worked in the US, I'd worked in the UK, but I'd never seen that before. And, you know, a bit like this video, although I can't see everybody, I got a lot of eye contact. I thought everybody was getting what I was talking about. So I said, you know, we're not doing well. I'd come in to rescue the business, and that business isn't doing well. And I looked over there, and this lady gave me a lot of eye contact, and I went over there, and, you know, I thought this team really gets it. It's not going to be a problem here. And as I was walking out the room, a lady, she always smiles when I mention her name, Gloria Chow. She said, I've seen some guilos, you know, white expats, but I've never seen one as bad as you. And she walked on. And, you know, whoa, where did that come from? You know, I thought the meeting had gone well. And so I sort of ran after her in the corridor and said, you know, what do you mean? Have a sit down. She said, well, firstly, you don't seem to know a lot about women. Secondly, you know nothing about face, losing face in front of your colleagues, which suggests to me you know nothing about the Asian culture. It suggests to me that you're just another Western man who doesn't get it, and you're going to fail. And at that point, you know, there was a bit of stony silence as I saw my career flashing in front of me. I said, well, what am I going to do? She said, you're going to have to go on your hands and knees and apologize. I said, whoa. So I'm new to Hong Kong, hadn't lived in Asia before. So I literally went on my hands and knees. I went on my hands and knees and said, I'm so sorry. I'm really sorry. And, you know, I don't know enough about your culture. And clearly I don't know enough about managing such an incredibly powerful group of women. They taught me so much. And it's a long introduction, but you know, and that team became an extraordinary high performance team, and I will be forever in their debt. But when I came back to London, I was quite surprised, having lived in Asia, in Hong Kong and Singapore, how many women there were in senior positions. And we came back to the UK, there were none. And so I started on a journey of really pushing female talent and diversity. And then I came into government, but we can come into, you know, the government role later on. But really, if you're going to have a team that performs, you start by knowing yourself, and then you need lots of diversity of thinking. And the idea that 12 men, or indeed 12 women who think the same, Venus and Mars, you're going to fail. So I'm a big believer that in business that you need people from different backgrounds, different thinking, particularly in a period in the world of today where there is so much change. So that's my quick introduction. So we're in a period of unprecedented change, and you need lots of diversity in your teams.
Thank you, Mervyn. And I think you bring a good point where it is the diversity. It is not all women or all men, and gender diversity is just one of many diversities. Now, when I think of what you went through, your personal journey as a leader, and what you took away from that situation, I guess the question is, how do we actually get that aha moment happening with leaders in Sri Lanka? And I'm hoping what you have learned through the journey in the UK will help us maybe take away a few, few points that might be useful for leaders who are listening here today. And I'm hoping that we do have a mix of men and women who are listening in, because like we discussed before, this topic, and to make this change, you do require both genders. If I may dive into the business case, which I think is usually a good way to make the point, make it easy to influence, what do you see as the business case that would be helpful to convince our leaders here in Sri Lanka?
Well, look, when I took on the cause in the UK, I took it on because I was a government minister. I'd been campaigning as chief exec of Standard Chartered worldwide and as chairman, the whole issue of diversity and inclusion. But when I joined the government, it was 2008, so financial crisis. We got an economist, a famous economist from Harvard Business School, Michael Porter, to come over to the UK and look at what you need to do to get out of the financial mess that everybody was in. And he did a sort of 6-point plan. And one of the key platforms of the plan was to get more women back into the workplace, because lots of different societies lose, and COVID is going to have a huge impact on this. Women get out of the workplace, they don't come back in. And also you get a lot of industries that are just dominated, like the law. 6 out of 10 grads, in the legal profession were women. But when you look at the top echelons of all of the partnerships, it was all men. So Michael Porter told us that, we needed to do some things, separate infrastructure, have a long-term plan, etc. But what he said also, in an observation about UK business those years ago, was that we didn't have any women in top roles. Do you know that when I started the work, 21% of the top 100 companies in Britain had never had a woman on their executive committee or their boards in their history, ever. Well, how can you look at the UK, how many cabinet ministers has Britain had in its history? It's like 50 odd. It's a disgrace. So part of the issue is that, I have to talk about myself because it's relevant. I didn't speak English till I was 7. I come from Wales. I'm proof that anything is possible. I'm 5'5" and a bald-headed git. So basically anything is possible. And I think sometimes women don't realize their potential. And I do, a huge amount of mentoring and a huge amount, of recruitment. And when you look at it, if you ask a man about a job, a man will say, of course I can do the job. What's the pay? What grade is it? You ask a woman about the job, and I know it's sweeping generalization, but the woman will say, actually, are you sure that I'm equipped for it? I need some time to think about it. It's different approach. I believe that in order to force change, you have to be tough. You have to be consistent on your messaging. And that's what I did in the UK. And it had to be a man, it had to be one of the insiders that was going to force the change in the UK. So you've got to find somebody, or maybe 2 or 3 people, male, individuals who can lead the campaign together with a group of women. But, the world's changing very, very fast. And I think that a society that doesn't have women at the top in every aspect of life, I don't think they're going to be competitive.
I agree, and I think a lot of the research, not just the report that you refer to, actually highlights that. There are lots of McKinsey reports I've come across that say the same thing. But I'd like to pick up a point you mentioned in terms of being hard on ourselves to actually make this change. The report talks about it, and this is something that I end up having to kind of deal with when I'm talking to any manager and bringing up the whole concept of gender diversity, is there are these 2 approaches, the voluntary approach versus the quota. And going through the report, what I realized was both approaches seem to have been successful for different countries in Europe.
Yeah.
Do you mind just breaking that down a little bit to try, so that I'm always trying to figure out what is the advice I give, leaders in Sri Lanka?
Well, I think, look, we've had a great turnout today, over 100. So thank you for turning out. It's a really important issue, but a lot of people are turning out because they're on their own journey, their own career journey, their own journey of life. And, I do think that everybody told me when we started in the UK, particularly the men, the women aren't there. There's no, we've got a shortage of women in the UK. We've got a shortage of talent. They're just not there. So that's what the headhunters said. Then I go to, the other chairman, and they say, we've got to have a woman on the board, for example. She's got to have P&L experience, profit and loss experience. Well, hang on a minute. Why? Oh, well, that's what we're looking for, or they've got to have been on a board before. So this is not about boards. My view is, those listening today, you should help on a charity. You should help an arts organization. You should get experience, boardroom experience, trustee experience as soon as you can. And because that builds your experience base. The reality in Britain was that the talent was so deep, and it was just extraordinary. And as I said before we started, this is about my 400th event. And everywhere I went, and it's so funny, I would go home and tell my wife about these amazing women that I had met. And she'd say, oh, come on, I'm going to do a study of underprivileged men, because I don't want to be coming home and talking about these amazing women. But the reality is that we started to look at where the talent was, and it was everywhere. So I think there is no doubt, in a culture like Sri Lanka, and it goes for a lot of different countries, that it becomes a social movement. And I use the threat of quotas to scare the chairman, the headhunters, the shareholders. I used it to scare them. But I also used the media very skillfully. So I did use the Financial Times, and I did use the Times newspaper and 1 or 2 others to just, write articles and whatever. Because, if you write articles, Bani, and everybody else does, it sends a message. So it's a campaign, and you don't get change in society unless you keep at it and keep at it. So you've got to, I'm very proud of what we did in the UK, but there's still work to be done. We don't have enough, we don't have any disabled people on the boards of top companies. Diversity and inclusion debate has moved on. It's now a very wide agenda. And, we've got to be careful that we've got to have ethnic diversity, etc. But we've got to really make sure that women speak up.
Okay. So, so I guess what I'm hearing you, and I think you've repeated this a few times with almost every answer, is this agenda needs to be intentional. It can't be by the wayside. And that intentional agenda needs to start with the leaders. Obviously, we can talk about the report, we can talk about the success because of the KPIs that you have or the measurements that you know, this report put in place, so that over the 5-year period, you could, you know, measure the progress, etc. And here we talk about women on boards, which is at the senior most level. And I like the advice also, Mervyn, that you gave women who are striving to get on boards, where to get involved. Don't wait for the perfect opportunity, get involved as much as possible so that they have the wider experience and not just deep dive into one area. What are one or two things, you know, is there like a simple 3-point checklist that leaders can focus on that you might have used with your threats to actually start making change in these companies? Because like I mentioned before, I mean, it's only 9% on boards in Sri Lanka right now. But if you look at the lower levels in most companies in Sri Lanka, they start at about 40%. So it keeps dropping off. Is there anything leaders in companies can specifically do to retain?
Well, I think it's a great question. I'd sort of widen it a little bit. I think there is a direct relationship. Look, I don't know the people on the Zoom calls, and they don't know me, but I have been involved in so many different things, and having been on the dark side, you know, in politics, and having been a CEO, and now having worked for the last decade in private equity, and you know, I've also been very involved in sport. I was on the board of a Premier League football team. I'm on the board of World Rugby and chairman of tennis, Lawn Tennis Association, Wimbledon. It doesn't matter whether you look at sport, the arts, or business, or whatever walk of life. You get results through engagement. You get engagement. You get everybody around the vision, and then everybody's clear about what is expected of them, and you know, and you create an environment and a culture which is a great place to work. So you know, when people are engaged and there's just a great place to work, and you've got diversity in the backgrounds and thinking, then you'll get exceptional performance. And so for me, I think that engagement and diversity are the two things that you need to be very successful. And so in that regard, I think, you know, in Sri Lanka, you know, there are 100 people on the Zoom call. It only needs 10 people, 10% to really say, right, I'm going to, you know, I'm going to have my speech, I'm going to perfect it, and then I'm going to be a spokesperson. And you literally, you're relentless on it, and you have to be relentless. So what I would say, you develop your own narrative. You know, you've got yours, Bani, I've got mine. Everybody develops their own narrative as to why this is important. But it's about performance, engagement, and diversity. And I think that a great story, which sums it up really, is when I started on the journey, the men who were chairing the companies, they really started to exclude me from their club. Right? I mean, what are you doing stirring up all this stuff, you know? And I said, well, because it's the right thing to do, and it's what we need to do. Well, I think you're crazy, and you know, there's no women around, and they're not interested. I mean, the famous quote of one of the chairmen who literally was chairman, he didn't last long. He said, women's real role is in the kitchen. And he was chairman of one of the biggest companies right? And honestly, I went nuclear after that and said, get him out of the job. He shouldn't be in, he shouldn't be in the job. Anyway, cut long story short, I think that I wrote a letter to every chairman, and obviously some of them just put it in the bin. This one chairman put it in his briefcase, and he went home, and he didn't read the letter, but his briefcase was open, and they were having dinner at home, and his daughter, 16 years of age, saw the briefcase open and saw a letter about, gender balance and diversity, and said, oh, this is interesting, Dad, and stole the letter, went upstairs, read it, came downstairs and said, Dad, you're not one of these dinosaurs, are you? So if you any of the top men, you ask them the question, have you got a daughter? What world do you want for your daughters? What world do you want? You want your daughter to do well, don't you? You want to get rid of inequality. You want to get, you want the world to be a great place. And I think, this is digressing completely now. I won't be invited back again, but I'm not getting paid, so it's okay. One of the 9/11 was one of the most horrendous things, but you know what it did do? It was a wake-up call about the different understanding of cultures. And I think over the last sort of 10, 20 years, there's been a much greater understanding of Ramadan, much greater understanding of Diwali. There's a much greater understanding of the different faiths. And when you're a leader in companies, you need diversity, and you also need an understanding of faiths. And that's also just as important. So long-winded and straying off the subject matter, but what I would say, everybody has a voice, and you have to use your voice, and you have to be tough. So you have to have thick skin, and don't worry if people criticize you. I'm sure you've had it, Bani. I mean,
you're right, Mervyn. And one point I wanted to bring up here, well, one question, but let me just make this statement and back to the question, is I hate public speaking, but this point of I have a message and I've decided the message is far more important than whether I sound right or whether I perfect it or not. And that's the narrative I'm pushing now, hopefully role modeling that you don't have to be perfect before you actually get on that stage and start sharing that message. And I think that's what I heard from your many stories of persisting and not taking no credit.
Yeah. I think if somebody had told me when I was 21 or 18 or 16 that I was going to be a lord, I'd have died laughing, really. It's just, I would have said, what a joke. Or that I would be speaking everywhere because I used to get so nervous. So I think you have to practice. So if you're going to be a spokesperson on diversity, you've really got to practice on your own your speech and perfect it. And, I think that on something as important as this, you've got to perfect your script, and that requires a little bit of work on your own, thinking about the subject and writing some notes, and that's what I did. And so I mastered the subject and then really went out there, and as you are doing.
Thank you. A side question. What were some of the things that you did to get included back? You mentioned that you were sort of excluded when you went down the path that is not mainly trodden by men. Did they kind of pull you back in? Did you have to do something different? Because I do see that as the biggest issue here in Sri Lanka. There is a boys' club, and
there's a boys' club in but it's everywhere, Bani. It's everywhere. I mean, it's in Hong Kong, Singapore, you go, you name it. I think it's a little bit different in one or two other places because women play such a pivotal role in places like Singapore, in government and in business. It varies. But what I would say, I showcased case studies. So there are 100 people on the call. I bet you there are 15 women on the call whose CVs and backgrounds are fascinating, really interesting stories. So what you do is you get the 15 stories, you collect them, and then you talk about them. So I started to talk about, well, you say there are no potential directors, but if you thought about this one or that one, and I would showcase female success, entrepreneurship, and stories. I would tell stories about women, female entrepreneurs, doctors, you name it. By the way, it's not, it's not business, it's medicine, it's education, it's, incredible women who have, built up schools or foundations or charities. I think that I did, in that regard, McKinsey were incredibly helpful to me. You mentioned them. McKinsey were unbelievably helpful, as were one or two other firms. And I showcased success. On many occasions, I would start by putting a slide up of 10 women and their backgrounds and saying, wow, aren't they amazing? This is the UK. And then I'd put photos of 10 men who were the chairman of the companies and say, what a bunch of old whatever. So, you have to name and shame, but you have to showcase success. What I would like to know is, half a dozen female entrepreneurs in Sri Lanka, half a dozen people who have really done amazing things in COVID. Is there 2 or 3 women who have created extraordinary charities, et cetera, et cetera. And then you build and you showcase, and maybe you put it on TV, or you get one of the companies listening to sponsor it. And then everyone says, whoa, the talent across the country is amazing.
So I think you bring up a good point where we have social media. So to use social media to share stories, showcase, individual stories, to kind of use that medium, because the more you hear about it, there is a certain level of influencing that happens just by the fact that the conversation is out there, even if all people are not engaging directly. If I may dive into a little bit of semantics or a little bit more detail. When you talk about women in leadership in companies where there are no leadership, what I've usually seen is they will pick one person, put them on the board, and kind of not let you have that conversation any further because they have the token person on the boards. And research has clearly shown that when you go from the 5-6% to the 25-30%, which in other words means there is more than one diversity rep on the board, that's when you actually see the business case that you referred to. How did you see that evolving in the UK? Any sort of advice, comment?
Yeah, very much the case that the women who were the first women to go on the boards really had to have courage and say, I can't be on my own. I need somebody else. And they did just that. So it's very dangerous for the women. A company turns around and says, oh, well, I've sorted that. I've got a woman on my board. Then the woman has to have the courage to say, no, I need somebody else. And it's like it sounds grand, but it's not meant to be. But it is a social movement. I think that there are 2 or 3 things happening in society today. One is in the old days, and I use this expression daily, in the old days, the youngsters in every walk of life would look upstairs for wisdom to a board of directors, CEO, whatever. It's the other way around now. The boards and the CEOs, they need to go downstairs. They need to connect with youth because things are moving so quickly. And the youth of today isn't going to stand for my generation doing nothing on climate change. it's not going to stand and allow the inequality gap to grow. It's not going to stand and allow a lack of diversity. And so, you know, what I would argue is that there is a need for a connection with with young people, and any company that's going to survive and grow, they're going to have diversity on their board. They're going to have to be climate sensitive. They're going to have to be very sensitive to their supply chain and all the issues around, you know, ESG, etc. So I think the simple answer is, if you're one of the women that gets on a board, you have to fight even harder for other women.
Thank you. So actually, when it comes to leadership, whether it's men or women, being an ally to this cause is so critical, because it's just not that one person who can make the change. It's the wave you want to create. It's the tide that you are.
And you have to mentor. You know, you must know this better than anybody, given your role. You know, everybody on the screen, although I can't see them, has the opportunity to do two things. Firstly, to say thank you to somebody that's done something really interesting and good in the last week. So when you finish the video, write a little card. I have a fountain pen. It's very old-fashioned. But when you get a card written on a fountain pen, it seems to make more difference than when it's written in a biro. You write a thank you card to somebody who's done something for you. Thank you cards mean more than anything, and people really appreciate it. The second thing is you mentor somebody who you think is going to be, in this case, a woman of the future. So I think saying thank you and mentoring are very important. Everybody knew that I was mentoring, you know, 5 or 6 women, and that literally also impacted people, because I was mentoring a lady, Carolyn McCall, who runs a British company, ITV. I was mentoring a lady that was very senior in the UK police force. I was a whole variety. So, you know, that allowed me to talk about mentoring women, and I wasn't just a campaigner, if you see what I mean. So mentor, please mentor people.
I think I saw a question which I think is very relevant to what you just said. So I think I'm going to pick that up. That there is talk about that there is a lot of mentorship for women, but not enough sponsorship. What do you see as the difference between the two?
Well, look, the most important thing for anybody who is being, you know, mentored and sponsored is that, and, you know, lots of Sri Lankan companies have great schemes, and, you know, every top company around the world has mentoring schemes or whatever. What I would say is, women, and it's a sweeping generalization, and some people will switch off their Zoom call now when I say this, but it's back to this issue of men and women. Women are a little bit reluctant to press forward, and I think they have to be bolder. Once you've got your mentorship, you know, you're being mentored, I'd be less concerned about sponsorship. I'd be more concerned that, am I bold enough and courageous enough? Just go out there. That men just do it. They just do it. And of course, women have, I really do believe there's so much female talent in the world that's not being identified and are not in powerful enough positions. And I think there's no shortage of female talent in Sri Lanka, no shortage.
So this is not an excuse, but this is something I continuously hear when it comes to, like I mentioned before, you do have women. 50% of, I feel, the workforce is actually women at a junior level. But you see them dropping purely because they, and the usual theme that you hear is you have family, you have aging parents. And what kind of, what advice would you give, Mervyn, about the fact that, you know, if you think of history, men are fathers, men are husbands, they have parents too, but men have had the luxury of being able to have a career and have all the other stuff. How could we convince women that they should strive for both of it, the career as well as the personal life?
I think it's subtly, the men may, on the screen may smile. I think it's subtly changing. I think historically, the burden of responsibility, if you had children, seemed to be 60% with the mum and like 40% on the dad. I think that's different now. Most families, they're, you know, both people are working, and you've got a lot of change going on where, you know, I was on the board of Diageo for 10 years. There's lots of, I mean, tens and tens of examples in Diageo where, you know, it's the other way around, that there's more and more house husbands, whatever you want to call them. But I would say is we're in a world where we're going to see an explosion across the world of female entrepreneurship. So if women, in a world where you can start a business with no money, literally at home, particularly now, I think the UK is like at most countries, the explosion of female entrepreneurship is extraordinary, and right across the UK, women saying, I don't want the hours that I've been working, true of men as well, and they're starting their own business. So I think we're going to see a female entrepreneurship explosion globally.
I think you're right. Sometimes the corporate hours, etc., tends to make it difficult for women to choose that option. But I think what I also heard you say, Mervyn, is women do have to be bold enough, even at home, to be able to ask for that support and help, so that they do have the time to dedicate to both, instead of trying to be super women, trying to do everything by themselves. And that's a very Asian trait I've seen here, where women feel like they have to take care of the home, they have to take care of the children, and they don't ask for help. So this is going to be advice from me, but women do need to have those, you talked about having those, taking those bold moves and, you know, tougher conversations.
I mean, look, you know, everybody will, the women on the screen will smile. I'm not suggesting that, you know, there's like 100 people and we have 60 divorces in the next month. But I think we're in a world where there has to be courageous conversation and what I describe as tough love. You know, the old model doesn't work anymore. And so therefore, I think post-COVID, there's another phenomenon, which is, and I know there are one or two CEOs on, you know, I can see one or two names that I know. And basically, if you're running a company today and you don't understand what COVID has done to people's thinking, then you're asleep at the wheel. People are going to have a different attitude to work-life balance. They're going to have, and if you say, oh no, everything's going back to normal, well, great, then good luck to you, because I don't think they are. And I don't think most companies think they are. That people want more flexibility in the workplace. They're going to want a different, it depends on your job, obviously, but you know, the reality is that the world has had a seismic shock, and there are going to be some unintended consequences of the pandemic. And I think there's going to be a more realistic, in some countries, attitude to work and work-life balance. And I think it doesn't matter whether you employ 10 people or, 500,000, you've really got to think about your culture and your flexibility and what you're doing for your employees, because the world's changed.
So Morvin, I think you bring up a really good point. With all the challenges and difficulties we've had with COVID, one thing that I think COVID has proven to us is we can work from home. And that flexibility is actually possible if you put your mind to it. But you also bring up a valid point where lots of companies, and I think I do see lots of companies, I'm sad to say, who are waiting for it to go back to the old normal. And I think this is an opportunity, the fact that we have proved to ourselves, as women, as people, companies have proved to themselves that the flexibility is possible and you can get work done, you can get business done. Do you see that being a catalyst for more women to get involved and demand that flexibility or a request for that flexibility?
Well, I think, there's always this sweeping comment that's made by my wife, by, women generally across the world, that women are better at multitasking than men. They can handle lots of different things. What I would say is, honestly, and I know some of the men on the screen may disagree, but I really, really do believe that 2 years ago, somebody would say, I'd like you to speak at a diversity and inclusion event in Sri Lanka. And I would say, I can't go to Sri Lanka in June. I just can't. Right? So I wouldn't have come. So here we are. We've got 101 people, plus on a screen, and I'm in the UK in Battersea. What it highlights is technology is getting more and more advanced, and it's going to get beyond, it's beyond our comprehension. In my career, we've seen the introduction of the PC, we've seen the introduction of the mobile. We're moving into now a very, very different world where basically employers are going to have to think ahead on the impact of technological cultural change on their business models. So I do think, some industries are still very dependent on people going to a factory or whatever, and they won't change, but they're going to have to be flexible. That's what I would say.
I think we have about 10 minutes more. I just wanted to dive into a little bit more of a personal question. What I mean by personal is more about people traits. Now, listening to you, especially the Hong Kong story, some of the things that I think you highlighted were about humility. It was about, not letting your ego kind of rule. And I think those are leadership qualities that are going to succeed. Those are the qualities that will bring inclusion in. We all talk about diversity, which is kind of maybe getting the diversity through the door, getting the women through the door. But the bigger point is retention, developing those women, developing the diversity in order to actually get the business value, which is that they are at decision-making positions. And actually adding to that whole creative ideas, a diversity of thought, etc. So I guess my point is, what are some of the things you have seen UK companies doing to retain these women in companies? Maybe this is kind of moving away from the report, which is about women on boards, but in order to get to that level, you do need to kind of push them along. What are some of the specific initiatives you've seen companies in the UK do to improve retention?
Well, I'm going to answer, I did 18 months in politics. So, you get used to answering you're giving a completely different answer to the question. You know, it's like all politicians. So a great friend of mine passed away 10 days ago. I had to do, very British, but I had to do a eulogy, you know, for 15 minutes at his funeral last Wednesday. And it's a very, it's only the second time I've done one, and it's very sobering, and it brings you back to the real world. And, you know, in doing his eulogy, I didn't talk about how much EBITDA his company made. I mean, why would I? I didn't talk about, you know, how many brands he had bought or whatever. Well, obviously that's not relevant. What I talked about, his qualities, his kindness, his, you know, reaching out to people who were less fortunate than himself. So the point, and I'm not getting philosophical, whatever, but the point of that is that when an executive finishes their career, they don't ask, even if you own the business, they don't ask about how rich you are, or, you know, how much earnings per share or whatever. When you look back as an individual, you look back on what were you able to achieve for others and what you were able to do for society in general. So my point would be that everyone who's listening is on a journey, and basically the judgment of them will be, you know, how have they managed to help others, to develop others, to mentor others, and, you know, and help a cause like diversity. So it's a bit long-winded, but what I would say is that in this period of extraordinary geopolitical tension, change, and we're in a technological revolution, we're in a climate change revolution. So everybody has to figure out what they're going to do to make a difference. You have to make a difference. And so if you work in a company, you have to be a little bit of an activist. You have to be an activist and say, I'm sorry, but this isn't good enough. And if they're going to fire you, then maybe you're working for the wrong company because they don't share your values. So if you are an activist on, you know, ethnic diversity or whatever it might be, it could be we're not doing enough on climate change or whatever, and they say, well, you know, you've got to shut up because otherwise we're going to fire you, then maybe you're working for the wrong company.
I love that, Mervyn, because I have been in situations like that where I've had to walk away.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's tough.
And I think you're right. And that is that boldness, that is that risk you have to take if you are going to leave a legacy that is worth, you know, worth anything other than just money. So I, as much as you said it, and I know you went philosophical, and I completely relate to that, your measure, is it in rupees or is it in all the other aspects, is, I think, a reflective question for everybody, especially everybody on this call, because I think what I'm also hearing you say is each of us have to be an activist towards this kind of change and what we believe.
I think the talent is that I have seen over many years in Sri Lanka is there for everybody to see. The innovation that goes on in, you know, whether it's textile and garments or whatever, you know, food, you name it, tourism, it's extraordinary. And obviously the country is going through short-term difficulties, but, you know, in its credit rating, liquidity, etc. But what I would say is that I do think it's a time for boldness of individuals, you know, particularly on issues like diversity and inclusion. It doesn't mean to say that you get really bolshy and, you know, and then they fire you. It just means that you master the subject as to why it's important for a company and then you become an advocate for it.
There's lots to be done, and I guess I will continue.
So we need some more questions in the last holder. Is society in the corporate world?
Linda, are there any more questions?
Yes, Bani. One of the questions is, with all the interest and awareness for diversity and inclusion, why do we still see fear and doubt of having women in top positions in companies?
Yeah, well, there's no fear and doubt in the UK. There used to be huge skepticism, you know. I mean, the expression was, they're not good enough, they're not interested, there isn't the talent. And, you know, I mean, you had extreme comments like, all they're interested in is what they're wearing. And, you know, the reality now is so different. Nobody, you know, I've just appointed, you know, one man and one woman to the board of ICG, and the female candidates I interviewed, and there were many who were keen to join, absolutely extraordinary. So what I would say is that I think it's, you know, there has been a profound change in the UK. I'm just interviewing female non-execs for the board of Letter One, which I'm chairman of, because, you know, want to change the board. Oh, wow. I mean, just extraordinary talent. So, yeah, I think the UK 10 years ago was so old-fashioned, you know, and very male. Now I don't think it is. I really don't.
Thank you for that. Another question that came in is, what would be your comments on the fact that COVID has pulled back the strides made by women in business for decades? Working from home, homeschooling, taking care of the home, and how can we overcome that?
Well, it's really interesting. There's a wonderful professor, you know, Linda Grattan, who, if you haven't followed her work, it's really interesting. Linda Grattan is a professor at London Business School, and her expertise is in the subject of people living longer. So somebody that is born today is likely to live past 100, and, you know, pandemics to one side, that they're, you know, why would they go to university at 18 if you're going to live to 100? Why don't you go to uni at 30? Why don't you travel the world in your 20s? If you're going to be working till you're 80, you know. And so it used to be that people would retire at 50, then it went to 60, now 70 is the new 60. And so what I think COVID has done, I actually think the other way. Right across the world, men have realized what an amazing job women have done on homeschooling. They've also realized the value of teachers right across the world. So I think that I honestly think homeschooling right across the world has been like a wake-up call in marriages, I mean, it's changed the nature of a conversation in a household. So I actually think, as a result of this, I think women have got more power. How they use it, that's a different thing. So I honestly, you know, I think people have realized how very difficult it is to teach children, and how glad most parents are they outsource it to teachers. And I'm glad I'm too old to, I've got grandchildren, so I'm glad I'm too old, but, you know, to have done it. But I do think we're in an age where female role models are going to be in medicine, in science. You look at, you know, the people who created the vaccines. Oh my goodness, how many of those scientists were women? It's incredible. And we're showcasing them in the UK. It's incredible how many were women and the sacrifices they made. So I actually think female empowerment will strengthen as a result of what happened. I really do believe that. And I do believe the other thing, which is digressing, leaders have a positive bias. You don't follow people who are negative, you follow people who are positive. And the reason you don't follow people who are negative, because all they do is go down on other people. Leaders have a positive bias. And I think, it is incredible to look at female role models. I think are going to be a huge thing post-COVID as to how many of the scientists across the world were female.
Linda, are there any more questions?
Well, there's a whole range more, but I think I'm going to have to make a selection and maybe ask one more. Thank you for sharing the tips that work, such as telling stories and being intentional in the work that you do. Are there one or two things that really help to move the needle in terms of numbers?
Yeah, you find there may be one or two male chairmen on this call who might just be the men that would come, into the team to make a big difference. So I did get one or two chairmen who I knew believed in it on my side very early on. So I think in Sri Lanka, and of course, how you do it, I'll leave that to Bani and others, but, you've got to figure out who are the 2 or 3 big chairman types, CEO types, who could really be on this journey and be part of it. And I did just that. I found 2 or 3 of them and they were amazing. And they would do just as many engagements as me. So it wasn't just me. So I think in Sri Lanka, to make a real difference, we've got to find obviously I'm going to give some thought to that as to who they might be.
So if I may just step in there for a second, Linda, I think what CBB is doing is exactly going on that path, because the next session is very much identifying some of those bold leaders who will show the way and maybe create the trends that are needed. Because I think what's very clear is once you set the trend, lots will do it because it's the right thing to do, but lots will do it to not be left behind.
I think it's also really good, Bani, for CBB to do just one event to take 6 unknown women, showcase what they're doing. It could be running a small business, it could be running a charity in a very difficult area, whatever, it doesn't matter. But inspirational stories of women, which I used extensively, and people would say, wow, it's not just executives in, there's an amazing woman in the UK who basically, for a variety of reasons, decided to create a charity where once people have decided, it's a very sad thing, to commit suicide, they are admitted into hospital or whatever, and she's created this charity called The Listening Place, and they counsel and help people who have decided to commit suicide to persuade them not to commit suicide. So 3,500 people have been through this charity and been cancelled, and only 3 have committed suicide. And this woman has done it on a shoestring. She's given her life to doing this. And, those sort of case studies, it doesn't have to be a multinational, but they're very inspiring. And, or it could be somebody who started a small business that's doing great things. They inspire other women, and they send a message to the men. The men aren't smiling.
Linda, I'm going to hand over to you now because I think we're out of time.
We are. Couldn't we have continued another hour, right? Thank you so much. We indeed have come to the end of the session. So thank you so much, Mervyn and Bani, for allowing all of us to listen to your conversation. That was so interesting. We definitely hope that all listeners have enjoyed the session. Now, our next webinar will be on July 7th. So this will be a panel discussion with some of these key influential Sri Lankan leaders that we believe already understand. Bingomal Tevaratantri from Standard Chartered, Sarindo Nambua from MAS, and Arjuna Nanayakara from LSEG, explaining why they feel strongly about diversity and inclusion, what they have learned, and how it has impacted their organizations. The registration link will be on the social media of the Council for Business with Britain soon, so please follow and like the Council for Business with Britain on Facebook and LinkedIn to stay updated. The link to this session will also be available and will be shared to all those that were registered. All that is left now for me is to thank once again our guests, Mervyn Davies, thank you so much. Our wonderful moderator, Bani Chandrasena, thank you. The Council for Business with Britain, and more specifically, the Diversity and Inclusion Work Group, and the British High Commission in Sri Lanka for all their passion and commitment. Wishing you all a wonderful day and hope to see you again on July 7. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bani.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.